the juicy topic of late. Everyone has very much voiced their opinions tenfold on the internet. We've got some extensions that have been signed after a very boring summer. We've got Matt Zuccarello signing 2 by 4.125. We got Marcus Foligno 4 by 4. And then we have Ryan Hartman, which was a 3 by 4, correct? Or was it a little over 4?
It was 3 by 4.
3 by 4. Okay. I feel like you can easily make an argument for any of these signings individually. I think the big issue for fans, and there's some that could easily fight against any of them individually too, I guess, but the bigger issue is the collective group. All three were brought back, and people want to say, oh, hasn't worked recently, or hey, we're blocking out prospects. Like, what's your perspective just on the extension and bringing all three of these guys back?
Well, it wasn't a crazy surprise. I mean, I think Mike Russo and I hinted at it in a column before, like the week before this kind of happened, that they were in talks with these three guys that they wanted to potentially sign. The players all wanted to stay. So there was a possibility. We also thought they might, there's a chance they could wait and see how the season goes before, locking them up. And that way you have more options at the trade deadline if you go that route. But if you go with the underlying theme and mentality of both Craig Leopold, the owner, and Bill Guerin, the president and GM, they're not going to stomach any kind of rebuild or youth movement or that kind of thing. And if you go between that philosophy and how much, Guerin loves his core and believes in his core, then it makes sense from their end. If they already like the player and the player's, proven, not necessarily like, not playoff or champions, so to speak, but they're guys that, they believe they're part of their future going forward. It makes sense to them to lock them up. Get some cost certainty, make for a boring summer for us writers next year, with all the offseason business pretty much taken care of. But I think the biggest thing is big picture, like as a massive group, right? And not just that. Ryan Hartman in itself is a smart signing, I think, because they've had issues number one center for how many years, and he's the one guy who's been proven to be effective with their best player, Kirill Kaprizov and Zuccarello. And maybe Marco Rossi will get there. I don't think he's ready right now, but maybe he'll get there to number one center, and Ryan Hartman will move down to a second or third line, either center or winger. But even Eck didn't do particularly great with those two guys in the spot duty for that. So that makes sense in an individual perspective. Matt Zuccarello, aligning him to the end of the contract with Kirill Kaprizov makes sense in its own. Zuccarello is still a very effective player, even at his age. Big in the power play, and at the top line, who plays there if he's not there going into next year? So, and Foligno, I think you can argue if it maybe a little more term than people were comfortable with, or maybe as far as people would probably be okay with a 3x3. People would have got that pretty easily.
Totally.
But he's a big culture presence guy, and he's along the lines of like a kind of a Bill Guerin mold, in that not as good of a scorer, like as skilled maybe as Bill Guerin was as a player, but kind of fits that kind of prototype. And so we can see why he'd be interested in doing that. But the big picture, you basically have your top 9 locked up for 3 years, essentially. Yeah. I mean, there's nobody. I mean, maybe Johansson's the one that'll be off the books first, but they're basically saying this is our group, and there may be some chances to move in a prospect with, if they don't sign Duhaime next year, or Dewar, or Pat Maroon's not going to come back, so that's another spot. So there's some spots in the bottom 6, maybe the fourth line or something like that next year, or if there's injuries. But overall, this is their group, and this is what they're going to go with. And whether you call them stubborn or not, that's their belief. And so I think that's, if you're going to be a naysayer, you're like that. Basically, you locked up your whole top 9. But if you're other side of it, you're like, well, who are the guys or prospects that you think are legitimately 100% better and ready? Do you think Sammy Walker is better than the options that they have right now in the lineup? Do you think Adam Beckman's better right now than, or Lettieri better than Rossi, Goudreau, or Foligno? So I think teams take a more conservative approach than fans or even media do with prospects. Like, they want to just put Ogren right in next year when he comes over from North America. They want to put in Daniil Yurov right in the top line when he gets over here for next year, not knowing the fact that it takes some of these guys time, and patience is very few and far between for guys like that. When we got Marco Rossi, it took him a little while, and he's still going to try to find his footing in the NHL. So I get the fans' frustration or the idea of just keeping the whole group together, considering there hasn't been a lot of track record in this core as far as playoff success, like 8-15 the last 4 years. But it is the strategy of the GM and the owner of not rebuilding, and they feel that the guys right now are better than what they have right now, what they have in the system, and also as far as better than hoping next summer there's a free agent that they can find that A is better and B would be willing to come to Minnesota over other teams.
Sure. No, and that's fair. And I think that the key things, one of them you already hit on, right? Why now? Why now versus waiting and seeing how the season plays out, whether it be injury, whether it be a down year, especially like the one that people are really harping on is Foligno, who had a down year last year. But the thing on top of that from fans, the 3 guarantees on Wild Twitter: death, taxes, and bitching about no movement clauses. What's your thought on those no movement clauses being thrown out?
And I've talked about this a lot because I came from Tampa and they give out a lot of no trade clauses. And a lot of those were tied to the fact that they took team friendly deals because they were in a no tax state, right? So
Totally.
if they got these Johnson or Kucherov or whoever to a long-term deal that was good money wise, and they trade him to Toronto or somewhere else, then all of a sudden that deal wasn't quite as lucrative for them. So they had to do the no trade clauses. Some teams, like I think Nashville, don't have no trade. They make it a philosophy. They don't do them all. I think that is a valid question of no moves, especially if it's the full term. And usually that guarantees you a little less money on AAV if you get the security to players, especially veteran players, in case of like Zuccarello, for example, or Foligno. But I definitely get that respect. Get that the no move clauses can be frustrating for fans, but it's part of the negotiation process all around the league right now.
Totally.
And I've asked that question too about why not wait? Why not see how the season goes? And if you take a step back, all of a sudden you lost some valuable trade commodity to the deadline. If Ryan Hartman got a first round pick like 4 years ago, what would he get this year?
Oh.
You know, Zuccarello.
I mean, Tampa Bay, that they're salivating over a guy like Ryan Hartman.
You know, like I think they would be hot commodities if that ever got to the point. But
yeah,
what was brought up to me was like, how often does that happen where you trade a guy at the deadline and then re-sign him that summer? And if the whole focus for the Wild was keeping these guys, then that was their number one goal. They accomplished their goal, right? So that's the point. And you can agree or disagree, and I think it's fair to have an argument against. But I think everyone always looking for the guys that they don't have, and versus what's your better option, I guess, right now or July 1st next year. Who's going to be out and available? That's A, cheaper than these guys, B, better than those guys, and that C would pick the Minnesota Wild to jump in. So
yeah,
fair arguments both ways.
No, and I mean, just like Jared Spurgeon, right? The second you lose him, you're going to miss him. The one thing that I think will quell a lot of the internet's concerns, they hear Elliot Friedman, Jeff Merrick come out and say like, oh yeah, expansion is going to happen. Like, teams are salivating after the sale of the Ottawa Senators. Like, there's big money to be had for future expansion. Do you see that happening any time before these no move clauses are expired?
I can see.
Yeah.
I mean, first, like, I don't know if he'd be there before Zuccarello is done, but it could be for like Hartman or Foligno. You know,
well, Foligno's got the same like no move stretch as Zuccarello, right?
Year,
Isn't it just the first 2 years?
And I think Hartman's like the last year, I believe.
I thought Hartman was didn't they retroactively add it to this contract and then also give it to him the first year of the new one or some? I don't know. I remember seeing it and I'm like, I didn't realize you could do this, but that's cool.
I don't think you could add it to the current contract.
I didn't think so either, but I swear that's what Russo said. I'm gonna have to go back and fact check myself on this one. But fair. But so, I mean, do you see within the next 2 years expansion happening?
I can see within the next 2 years an announcement of a franchise coming in. Sure. And then I don't know how long that'll take for the expansion draft to be set up or
I feel like Seattle was like a year and a half, wasn't it?
You know, I think we'll find out a lot quicker if Arizona's situation doesn't get resolved by January.
This is true.
But that would be more so a relocation versus just opened up full-fledged expansion.
Yeah.
And there have been encouraging news recently, at least at Arizona's front, about finding an arena site in that respect. So I guess if you're on the scale of a fan who's worried about everything, worried about the no move clauses in a couple of years for sure, after probably watching what this team has given up in expansion drafts to protect certain guys or the Dumbos of the world. But, I think as far as like the short term, I think the Wild are just trying to be effective in a really tough division and get beyond the first round for the first time in 8 years and give their fans obviously something to be really excited about.
Poor Matt Dumba sitting here watching all of his boys. He's just a year too soon.
Yeah.
If he had one more year on his contract here, he could be signing one of these extensions too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that would have happened, but
Sure.
Yeah, I think they had no money last summer to give a 1 year, $4 million deal that he got in Arizona, or what he was offered in Toronto. I think they were ready to move on to Faber. Obviously you need players on your entry level deal to be, contribute and be successful. You can't have all guys making $4 or $5 million, even though there's some teams that are getting there. So, yeah, I think that, the timing didn't work out for him in the end as far as being able to re-sign at any kind of rate. They could offer the minimum, offered him a McKinley Addison deal, which I don't think he would have taken. So,
right.
God bless him. I think the fans are going to miss him eventually. And I think obviously the guys in the room definitely miss him.